Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morris, where we share insights from great thinkers. Today I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Corey Keyes. Corey is a recently retired professor in sociology from Emory University and the author of the new book, Languishing. Corey, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You were called Dr. Positive by many of your students. How does somebody named Dr. Positive write a book on languishing?
Well, let's see if we can connect those dots. Early on, this positive psychology was emerging. I was one of the first. I may not have been the first, but I think I was close to one of the first professors in the country. They did well to teach a seminar, and in the seminar for credit on the topic of happiness. And I was surprised, to say the least, that how much hunger there was among my student population for that seminar. And after word got out, and it wasn't because it was an easy course, it was because the way I taught the lessons was about applying out of this research we'll call it happiness, this study of happiness to your life right now and thinking about your life in the future. And it blew up. I'm telling you, my course would fill up within minutes. I mean, within a couple of minutes of it being offered. And the students just started to love the fact that we were taking these things about positive psychology and applying them to some really difficult lessons of life, like the suffering of mental illness and how focusing on the positive and the lessons from happiness could actually help them deal with some very important problems and suffering in their lives.
Languishing isn't a word that's very commonly used. So to lay the foundation for the conversation, how do you define languishing?
Languishing is actually a formal diagnosis. I have a 14-point questionnaire that's in the book on languishing. And without going into the details of the diagnosis, it's the absence of some very positive and meaningful things in life, such as your life doesn't have direction or meaning. You may feel that you are not contributing or cannot contribute anything of value to the world. You may not feel that you have a community where you belong. You may lack a sense of personal growth, that you're not being challenged to grow. So when I say languishing, it's not just this feeling of meh, that way it's described. It's the absence of, let's just call it meaning in life. And then on top of that, there's the absence of any feeling of anything positive, and often don't feel much of anything negative. You just feel numb or dead inside.
And you talk about the opposite of languishing being flourishing.
Yeah.
How do you define flourishing?
And flourishing is out of those 14 questions, at least 7 or more, you say you experience that every day or almost every day in a typical month. And again, let's reverse what we just said about languishing. You may feel either happy, satisfied, or interested in life. You will need one of those 3. You're in it. And then you need 6 out of the 11 qualities of functioning well in life, such as the belonging, a sense of contribution, a sense of purpose, a sense of growth, a sense of self-acceptance, a sense of social coherence. In other words, you can make a sense of what's going on in the world around you. So it's a formal diagnosis of the presence of good mental health. And again, that's to answer your question, why languishing, Dr. Positive? Well, the pandemic blew up languishing. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to write a book on flourishing. Exactly right. That's the positive side. But you have to meet people where they're at. And a lot of people in the world, far more people were languishing than were mentally ill, even though mental illness blew up as well during the pandemic. The globe was languishing.
I really like the concept of a formal diagnosis of I'll call it positive state of being. It's a very rare thing to happen. We typically label the negatives and don't label the positives. You talked a little bit about flourishing as a skill and distinguishing from happiness. Could you speak a
Yeah.
little bit about feelings versus functioning?
Yes. It's a very big distinction in the world where I come from, where I study, what we call well-being. So a lot of people want to refer to this field as happiness, and happiness is just one of several very important touchstones on how people have thought about what is a good life. When do we know people are living well? Now, let's roll history back just quickly and go back into the ancient Roman and Greek world, where there was a lot of serious philosophers who were thinking about what constitutes living well and doing well in life. There was Epicurus and Aristotle. Epicurus championed the life of feeling good and avoiding unnecessary pain. So he was the king of pleasure or hedonism, which got a very bad thing. But he is referring to the fact that we are emotional creatures like every other sentient being and creature on this planet. We feel our lives and the way we're living. And so that's certainly one element of mental health. And as I said, there's three, shall we say, symptoms of flourishing: feeling happy, satisfied, or interested in life. Mm. But notice how many more of the functioning well. There's 11 signs and questions that I asked about functioning well. And that gets back to Aristotle's thinking about what constitutes a good life. And he said there was this, he wanted us to live up to standards of excellence, because what set human beings apart from every other living being in this world, the creature, was that we had this thing up here called the prefrontal cortex. We could live according to standards of excellence and not be ruled only by our emotions, pleasure and pain. And so I measured 5 qualities of social well-being: sense of belonging, contribution, sense of coherence, a sense of acceptance of other people, and a sense that we, as members of groups and institutions, we're growing socially. And then there's 6 qualities of psychological well-being: sense of self-acceptance, sense of personal growth, the sense of autonomy, the ability to sort of manage your own life, what's going on, and a sense of confidence that they can express their ideas and opinions, that's mastery, and then a sense of warm, trusting relationships with other people, we call positive relationships. So functioning well is when you have those qualities of warmth and trust in your relationships. I'm just going to give you a few examples out of that. The sense that we belong to a community. And lots of us are embedded in institutions and communities, but we don't feel a sense of belonging. We're not wanted there. And this self-acceptance that you like most parts of who you are or your personality. Sense of social acceptance is that you can trust and feel that other people are decent as well, despite the fact that they're imperfect just like you. And so functioning well is far more than just feeling good. It's focusing on how we're relating to other people, yourself, and your community and the world. And it's a remarkable thing. I talk about several studies in the book, and I'll end here to answer your question. We talk way too much about happiness and think that's the most important criterion in the world. But you may not know this, but over 20% of young people in the U.S. would meet the criteria for flourishing if we only measured the happiness. But they're not functioning well. They're not there when it comes to functioning well. They have over 5 times the rate of mental illness than the same age kids who feel good and are functioning well. And so in the book, I talk about this. It's much better to feel happy as a result of the fact that you have meaning and purpose and belonging, a sense of contribution, than to feel happy without those things, and you're getting it from very cheap, unsustainable things. A happiness that's not tethered to functioning well is a happiness that's the equivalent of a very horrible, non-nutritious diet. It tastes good, but it doesn't feed you anything you really need.
You said, and I think you summed it up really well here. You said, I think we've set up an impossible task because our hedonistic vision of happiness is impossible to sustain. It's quite possible to feel fulfilled and content, and that the world is meaningful by aligning yourself with some ideal, something bigger and better for you, and trying to live up to it.
Yes. That's a perfect way to just talk about what we were just talking about. And yet, I don't know if you remember the book. I didn't publish these data, but I talk about it in the book. I asked young people in our country to evaluate the importance of all 14 signs of flourishing and languishing. And the 3 feeling good were considered the most important for their life. Social well-being was dead last place, and psychological well-being was in second place. So our young people are reflecting something in the world where they're getting the message that feeling good and pursuing happiness is far more important than social well-being, that is the connected and contributing and accepting of other people, and far more important than psychological well-being, which is liking yourself, growing personally, and having a sense of purpose. Something has to change in our culture if we want better mental health and start to what we value.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about values and the stories we tell as a community. But before we do that, I want to get your point of view. Like, how do you think we got here?
I'm not going to romanticize the past and suggest that somehow we might conjecture that everything was better in the past. But there was a period in the 20th century. There's something about the Reconstruction that in the first 2 decades after World War II, where humanity, literally around the world, had to rebuild. We had to work together within our nations, and we had to also help other nations rebuild. And during that period, if you were privileged, of a certain race, you benefited from the amazing industry and institutions that were rebuilt. If people had a loyalty to the roles that they occupied, they defined themselves by their social roles, their parenting, their employment, their community roles, and so forth. Now, something happened in the late 60s and the 70s where people began to shift their real self away from institutions and their roles in institutions to going inside to their emotions and using their emotions as their compass in life. So previously, if you were living up to expectations in your roles, you knew you were living up in life. Now, it didn't necessarily make you feel good all the time, because it's hard living up to institutional rules and expectations. We abandoned that, and we lost connection to the institutions. And now, if it doesn't make us feel good, we start to believe it's not really worth it. So, I don't know about you, Adam, but nothing worthwhile in life has ever come to me without some sacrifice and suffering. You're putting feeling good aside. But that's the dilemma. Somehow, people went inside and now they're using their emotions to guide the sense of whether this is me or not me. Real, not real. Something I should care about, something I should disparage and dislike and push away. I think there was this great unraveling of trust in institutions. Now, I think that happened as a sociologist because right around the 70s, we began to accept income inequality. Right? I don't want to put the blame here on individuals. They began to lose trust first because our financial and our governmental institutions began to accept greed and that the fact that you could never have enough. And now we're at this point where very few people have, and a bunch of people don't have.
Hmm.
And so, and then they see all these other people up there that view talking about all these things that would make their life better and feel good. And it's almost like a drug. It's like, so I think we're in this point where I think we have to really begin to speak truth to power.
Hmm.
You know, the Bezos and others, the Elon Musks. Yes, you could have too much. And you have no shame right now. But, you know, last century, people had too much in a community, they would feel ashamed.
Yeah.
They would feel ashamed. Why? Because they have to go to the same churches, synagogues, and mosques, into the same community organizations as everyone else that they employ. Now, nobody who's in the C-suite has to face the communities and the people that work for them. They live separate lives. Mm-hmm. So you can live under the illusion that, you know, I got what I need and everyone should be trying to live like me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's an allegory that came to mind. Have you heard the allegory of the long spoons?
No.
It says, in heaven, in both heaven and hell, you give access to food, but the spoons are very long. And in hell, people try to feed themselves and they can't do it. And in heaven, people use the long spoons to feed each other.
Feed each other. Yes.
Yeah, when there's so much you shared there that it stands out to me. I mean, from my own experience and observations and reading, well, one thing on the hard stuff, nothing good comes from there's always a sense of struggle. I mean, Dr. Edith Eger was a Holocaust survivor, and she's got a book called The Choice and a book called The Gift. And basically, part of her healing journey is realizing that some of her greatest fruits in life came from her greatest struggles. And then on a lighter side, I was talking to Daniel Pink a couple years ago on this show, and I was sharing with them, we were talking about the writing process, and I was sharing that David Brooks defined his writing process or described it as crawling. This is literal. Crawling on his hands and knees, looking at out of context Post-it notes. And Daniel said, I'll raise the stakes on David and say, it's like crawling on your hands and knees, looking at out of context Post-it notes while wearing a necklace of steak and a tiger chomping at you. When I think about like how we got here from like the reading and exploration I've done, it seems like after World War II, parents wanted to create there was a greater surplus of resources. But parents seemed really committed to creating this fantasy reality for their kids. Yeah. And it seems like parents have continued to pass that on. And, you know, I know as a millennial, like expectations are so high, like for what your life should be and should look like. And also our culture has gotten so performative. You know, like with social media, and we judge so much of our experiences. And then also like we're way more individual than we've ever been before. Our communities have completely, like we don't have the need, like a lot of people don't have the need for like a faith community. You know, a lot of people don't have a need for an ethnic community. So it seems like all the ingredients are there to lead for this sort of languishing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot there, Adam.
There is.
Yes. There was surplus. Now, I mean, what was happening was that, you know, a majority of people, again, we have to acknowledge the grand inequality that was pervasive through our 20th century, even during this Reconstruction, but didn't benefit all people of all races. But if you were white and you were part of the grand Reconstruction, there was work, really good work for people of all levels of education. Now, typically, of course, if you had some apprenticeship after high school, really good work in middle class was a decent life. And actually, it was an improvement on grandma and grandpa's life, right?
Yeah.
I think the problem is we want to always look back, right? There's this quote by Kierkegaard that says, life is understood backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. And so we think we know we need to live today by comparing ourselves to the past. And somehow if it's better than somebody I know, it's okay. But that runs a lot, right, today. Because I know, and when I was teaching Emory students, that most of them felt trapped. I mean, how am I going to do better than mom and dad who's already an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor? And they want me to do better. And I'm like, what is better? What is success? We don't. And they're telling me, this is an enormous source of stress. If I don't do better than them, somehow I failed. And I'm like, oh my God, you know what? I was first generation. Just going to college was considered by my grandparents who raised me and adopted me. That was a success. Just going to college. Graduating was another level of success. The problem is we have to start thinking about a more sustainable form of whatever we want to call it, doing well. I prefer that over success. Success is just this loaded word. And I think the vast majority of people, if you look out in the economy today, are doing well. They're led to believe that the world is going to hell and that their lives have got somehow set. And yet they're taking vacations. Most people on all walks of life are taking vacations this summer. They're flying. The airports are full. The hotels are full. The national parks are full. And yet everyone's telling you that the world is going to hell. And I'm like, I can go where it's not great, but has it ever been great? We're doing well. We're doing okay. And then the question of being needed. Sebastian Ymer wrote a beautiful introduction to his book on Tribe, on how he, after leading college, went off seeking a sense of being needed, because the great modern experience has done one thing, he said: make us all feel unnecessary. Yeah, really, what was necessary for us, the great cog. But what he's talking about is that how can I really be needed and help other people? Isn't it amazing that we're struggling with that and there's so much need in the world? That's a hard one to figure out because, yes, you are needed. But we think of ourselves in terms of our work only, and our work takes us away from, often, I think most work takes us away from what's really needed in the world now.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say to most workplaces. If you want happy, flourishing employees, make sure they understand that what you're doing really is filling a significant and important need in the world. And if it's not, just be honest with them. And tell them to go find their next sense of need and how they're going to help the world outside of the workplace.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about shifting out of languishing. You go on the internet these days and you can find plenty of quick fixes. But how do you think about shifting out of a languishing state?
Now, the second half of the book is all about doing things, changing what you do. Now, that in and of itself, I had to take a big bite of humble pie because I didn't think that was going to go well with people, because you can't fit these 5 vitamins that I talk about into one a day, 5 minutes, and then you're back to doing everything you were doing. Right? It's not like stepping out and meditating or going to yoga once a week, or just thinking positive thoughts or changing your sense of hope or optimism. It's about changing what you do on a daily, weekly basis. And that's what researchers pointed. pointed me to, and I based this on studies, that people who are flourishing do more of those 5 things. They help others on a regular basis, they're of service, or they live their purpose. They're continuing learning new things, not to be instrumental and better at work, but just to grow and enjoy the sense of growth of learning new things. Third, they're engaging in some form of spiritual or religious practices that provide a sense of rehearsal for when shit happens. Can we say that, right?
Yeah.
People have to be prepared so that the better angels come out when they're not feeling good, when they're feeling mad, angry, or sad. What are you going to do about that? That's what religion and spiritual only prepare you for in the best way. Fourth, to connect. But to connect there on warmth and trust, belonging and mattering, being needed, finding a place where you need. And last, play and act in leisure. Stop consuming your leisure passively and get out there and make it happen for you. And don't, the fact of the matter is, don't do it alone. Do it with others and get active out there and have fun.
Yeah. When you look at the internet, like there is, and you were one of the founders, like the positive psychology movement, like what is kind of your take on like what you see on the internet? And I want to know specifically about the limits of positive psychology, if you think there is one, because often like you'll go out and there's like, you'll see a lot of stuff about changing your vibration and your beliefs aren't in line with the reality you want to create. Like that's a lot of the stories that you see on the internet and such.
Yeah. Well, I just came back from Austria. The reason for that trip was the 10th or 11th, like in one of those two, the European Conference on Positive Psychology, and over 1,000 people from all over the world were there. And the title of my talk was, "What's your why?" Positive psychology is a means, not an end. That's the way I was envisioning it. I didn't want to have anything to do with promoting a positive psychology that didn't help alleviate a significant form of suffering. But to this day, I just got an email from somebody who was at that conference, and we're going to follow up and talk about, because I'm about mental health. And she said, you know what? I've been at these conferences a couple of years now, and I don't know what they're talking about. They talk about all these piecemeal feel-good things, character strengths, optimism, flow. Well, what the hell are they addressing it for? What are those things for other than, well, have some more flow, have some more character strengths? And that was my point. What's your cause? And my cause is always two things. One is to find a better way to deal with the problem of mental illness. And it's very clear in the book, I make it very clear, the researchers now, we could be preventing a lot of depression and anxiety, even PTSD, by the way, if we promoted mental health that is flourishing and address something that's not being addressed, which is languishing, which is a gateway to a lot of mental illness in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's my cause, and what I was hoping would be one of the causes of positive psychology, but they continue to study these things as if they're one-dimensional things. And, the world eats it up. They want to learn about their character strength. They want to learn about whether they're optimistic. They want to learn how to be more hopeful. I want them to learn those things so that they can be mentally healthier and prepared for the slings of life.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of these trends and topics stem from already existing cultural stories about, kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and this step, like change your attitude, all this stuff. Do you think we need a shift in cultural stories to result in like a bigger shift from languishing to flourishing cultures?
In my very, very, very humble way, that story is part of the book. was part of what motivated me to take this line of research. Because the trauma that I lived the first 12 years of my life and the mental illnesses that I suffered, as well as the languishing and the occasional facing of suicide, made it very clear that I needed to find the other side, which was well-being, which is flourishing, because I was getting the best treatment possible. Getting rid of the symptoms of the negative does not mean you have the presence of the things that will keep you in recovery and keep you doing well. And so my humble attempt in that book was to say, a lot of really good things come out of some of the greatest darkness that we can face. And we need to tell those stories beyond criteria going into the Olympics. We will talk about how hard athletes train, as if that's the parallel. No, we need the stories of everyone's life of how they overcame. They not just overcame real darkness and suffering, but translated it into something beautiful, for lack of a better word. Because that was my gift. I was determined the greatest revenge for any suffering brought upon you is to take it, make something beautiful for the world, put that in the face of somebody who wants to permeate darkness in the world and say, no, not even the darkness can take away from me the light I have to give the world. I want stories like that. We need stories like that, not the kind that, I worked really hard, I trained really hard, I studied really hard. No. How did you overcome a significant setback in darkness and period in the world? I mean, in your life and in the world.
You're speaking to, you say mental health is not black or white, it's a goddamn rainbow.
Yes, it is. Well, if you look at those 14 science and those questions in the book, Adam, right? You only have to have 7 or more. Mm-hmm. Now, what I'm talking about here is to flourish doesn't mean you have to have all of those 14 things. One, and there's many different combinations. Think about all the ways in which people can put together a life that's flourishing. Some of us are focusing on personal growth, acceptance of others, acceptance of ourselves, autonomy, which is managing our life, and so forth. Others might have very different combinations. Mm-hmm. And that's a very important point, because people use the word flourishing without looking at our work and say, I'm just setting up an impossible standard. More than not. You only need to have 7 out of the 14. And you could put together whatever combination you want. There's nothing normative about this. And there's nothing in terms of exceptional or unnecessarily high standards. And so if I read on, say, the whole damn world could flourish in its own unique way. Mm-hmm.
And you speak to the fact that contrast, like you shared with your personal story, is such a great teacher for this stuff. And it's like, it's not, your book isn't meant to be a legalistic kind of prescription. It is, but it's meant to give you a framework for, things and ideas to add a little bit more flavor and fulfillment to your life.
It is, indeed. And the danger in having to thread that needle like that, Adam, is people are going to miss something that's really important in the work. And I have to say this out loud. We don't have to keep doing the same thing and expecting different results when it comes to mental illness. That's what we're doing. We keep relying on treatment and waiting for people to break down. And we don't have to engage in the old-fashioned prevention, which is just risk reduction, which is building fences. That's the way I use it, right? Building fences so nobody jumps off the cliff. We can promote the very things we want, which is mental health, and prevent, thereby, the things we don't want. So it's a very different proactive approach to mental health. And I've studied this so long that I waited to put this out there, but it's clear. We can prevent by promoting. And if we don't, we're going to get more and more of the same thing that we hear about every month. Oh, mental illness is getting worse. More young people are lonely. More people are disconnected. Yeah, we see intent with just pointing out the problems and not changing the way we're going about this issue of mental illness and the absence of mental health. So there is a prescription here in the sense, if you want it, here is a pill that you should swallow because it requires us to change the way we're approaching mental health and mental illness. And if you don't want to take that pill, fine. Everything will continue on the way it is. And if you like it, stop writing the articles about the fact that it's getting worse. Because that's not changing a thing.
You speak a little bit to, and I think this is like, this has been true in my experience, like our ability to feel the lows are connected to our abilities to feel the highs. Like when you're talking about the rainbow and you're talking about your personal experience with languishing and flourishing, that's something that's very real to me. So be curious to just get your thoughts on that.
That was a hard lesson to come by, but it's true. And it's true in the following sense. When you experience inordinate amounts of pain and suffering, and it's so overwhelming that nothing you do seems to manage it, most of us will turn to some form of substance to help us up. That substance could be literal, it could be drugs or alcohol, or it could be some sort of behavioral addiction. And what we're doing there is that is when we take back those medications and those, I'm calling medications, but it even happens with depression medication. What happens is we suppress the negative, but we're numbing all possibility of emotion. So there's now, we're still showing that emotional blunting happens for a lot of us taking depression medication. So we don't feel the sadness, but we're unable to feel much joy or even peace or happiness. Mm-hmm. And so what we end up feeling is languishing. And so I had to just step away from the substances, both the real medications and the medications of alcohol for me.
Sure.
So that I could begin. And I had to deal with the trauma because I thought it was always going to be my rear view mirror, and the more success I had, the more I outsmarted it. Guess what? It stays in your rear. So I had to face that down after I got rid of it. And there I was. Now I can experience those negative things and transform them because I can also experience the joys in life.
It's a beautiful experience, and it goes back to like the idea of these expectations we have for life, and some of these challenging, somewhat would call the lows, are also still life. It's part of this same life experience as the moments that bring us joy, and hopefully on our path and our journeys, we can learn to appreciate those more and more.
Yeah, yes, because I know there is something about the lows that if you sit with them, there's something that is almost cathartic and it clears you out. Mm-hmm. I referred to one of my favorite ever poems in the book. It is called The Guest House, and it's by the Persian poet Rumi. Mm-hmm. That poem is all about being able to welcome in as guests those lows and treat them with the honor that they deserve because they are guests. Because they're there to teach you something and clear you out so that you can have other things in your life, including the serenity, the peace, the joy, the contentment. But if you don't welcome them in, you used to keep your shut them out, guess what? More and more of them are out there knocking, and they will not go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about letting go, the concept of letting go, because like from your story and like for me, like I love meaning and purpose, but sometimes in the process, I can struggle with meaning and purpose. And I think there's a lot of
And
people that whatever their core focus is, they can also struggle with that same thing. And maybe I'm being a little prescriptive with the question or the discussion point, but how do you think about that phenomenon that happens for people? And I guess it comes down to attachment. One of my mentors says, you want to predict the future, pay really close attention to what you're attached to. Kind of why there's not really a question in there, but curious on your thoughts on that concept.
Yeah, the attachment and the lack of acceptance. You will keep doing the things that are getting in your way, but if you can't let them go, they continue to keep repeating. Buddhists said this wonderful saying, I won't repeat, but it's essentially whatever you're thinking today, you're going to think tomorrow, unless you change the way you're thinking. Whatever you're doing today, you will do tomorrow, unless you change what you're doing. Now, that's my way of thinking about this, because what we don't realize is that, like the Stoics, the philosophers, that's the non-spiritual approach. If you want to get spiritual, just learn about the things you can master and control, which is you. So much of my growth came from admitting I was part of the problem, or I was the problem. I was getting in my way. I wasn't letting go. I was being judgmental. This I is a very hard thing because the ego does not like to admit that it's not perfect. And that I talk about those things in the book. It's just, to me, humility is the key to acceptance. Those two things cannot go hand in hand. Because to be able to understand that you must remain teachable, because that's the essence of humility, really. I remain teachable. Throughout my life, I can always learn to be a better human being. But I have to do better. Not expect the world to get better before I get better. Right? We're all stuck in this world. All the world's a mean, damn bad place. Well, guess what? Rather than wait for it to change, you can change. And that's the greatest gift we have, is to understand. When I accept my own frailty, I can begin to accept others for who they are. When I change and I give other people what I want, guess what? I get the things I need. It's just a beautiful thing. It's like everyone wants to flourish, right? They want to be languishing. We're all hungry for those things that make up flourishing, but we can't meet them ourselves. We can't make them happy only for ourselves. You have to be able to be accepting of others if you want others to accept you and give you a sense of belonging. You have to value what others do for the world and yourself if you want others to value what you contribute to them. Right? We don't learn that lesson. Every generation has to learn that lesson. That's when a culture of flourishing is created. We acknowledge something, we grow from it, we don't blame everyone else for what we're carrying inside of us, which is often resentment, anger, fear. Control what you can control, focus on yourself, and guess what? The world around you will start to blossom.
Yeah, the role of personal responsibility and acceptance are just game changers. Like one of my struggles is I can get triggered by incompetence. And I had the thought, I was like, hey, maybe if I stopped judging people based on their competence, I would stop feeling like I'm being judged.
Yeah,
it's crazy. And I love what you say in languishing and in this conversation around self-kindness. I think self-kindness is in our personal growth efforts, we bypass self-kindness in pursuit of more answers. And I know in my experience, when I started to be kinder to myself, a lot of my existential questions just went away.
Yeah. Yes, because you start to realize you're just like everyone else. Nice. That's what's the realization for me.
Beauty of community, beauty of group therapy, if you're not getting it in community, is you can actually see this stuff.
You can see yourself in others. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden. I see that in the magic of what we call the rooms. Hey, oh my God, people light up. People walk in there, demoralized, physically, torn to shreds, and they see others. They see others, and those others who have been on the journey see themselves in that newcomer. And all of a sudden, that's the magic. That person who felt isolated alone, who felt the only friend was the drug or the alcohol, now starts to realize there's hope. And all of a sudden, the transformation begins.
Yeah, I went to the coolest thing. I think about growth mindset. I think about the power of possibility. I went to an AA meeting supporting a family member a couple years ago. It was my first time I've ever been to one, and like they just do so many things well. But I'll never forget, this guy stands up and he goes, "I'm turning 70 next week, and I'm so fired up for my 70s because just in my 60s I learned to be nice to myself."
Yeah. Because you have a saying in rooms, I'm going to love you until you learn to love yourself. We will love you until you learn it. Because the research is so clear, Adam, and I wrote about it in the book. I didn't do it, but it's magnificent. When we're committed to ourselves, we remain more motivated to grow and persist in failure. I always have the mindset that if you're going to work hard, you have to be hard on yourself.
Yep.
If you're going to do hard and try to grow, be really hard on yourself. It's just the opposite. To get hard and grow, you got to be more kind and forgiving to yourself first, because you will then help others grow, because you'll do the same. Yeah, it's all these amazing I call them the paradoxes of what's really the beautiful web of spirituality that's built into life that we don't acknowledge. Because that logic, David Brooks talks about this in one of his TED Talks, where he's talking about Adam 1 and Adam 2. With the logic of spirituality is this reverse logic. You have to give to get. You have to let go to gain everything. And that is the path to sustain flourishing, that reverse logic.
I want to close our time together with a quote from Albert Camus. I think it really ties together what we're talking about. Letting go, the contrast is a powerful teacher. He says, "If you will never be happy if you continue to search for what happiness consists of. You will never live if you are looking for the meaning of life. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me lay an invincible summer."
Yeah, the Buddhists say all of us are Buddha. We're born with that Buddha nature. The divine is already there. I always thought I had to let God in. No, I had to open up the prison and the cage and let it out.
Mm. Well, Corey, you've been so generous with your time. No one could do more with 45 minutes than we did today. What's the best way for people to keep up with you and the work you're doing?
Well, I'm pretty focused on trying to use the book as a platform for changing the way we deal with the crisis of mental illness and mental ill health, which I call languishing. And so if you're up for it and you want to make a difference, just contact me, because I think we need to change the conversation and the way we approach these things if we want different results. Yeah. So that's what I'm about. And that can happen in the workplace, that can happen in our schools, and that can happen in our homes. Those things will have to change and focus on languishing, flourishing in all three places.
Well, we'll have links to the book and your website in the show notes, but appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Adam. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you for listening to Tuesdays with Morrissey. That conversation was with Corey Keyes. Corey is a recently retired professor in sociology from Emory University and the author of the book Languishing. What I enjoyed about the episode is how Corey provided the ingredients for a meaningful life. If you enjoyed the conversation, share it with a friend, and we'll see you here soon. Thanks.